This is People in the Know, a weekday forum for in-depth coverage of the news shaping China, the world, and your life. Now here's your host, Zheng Wang.
The most difficult thing to predict in Beijing these days is probably the weather. The rainstorm and the floods that came in its wake have boggled the minds of Beijingers who are used to dry days in the Chinese capital. Urban water management has been a perpetual challenge for the city. But in most cases, the problem has been that the water tables have kept falling and a persisting drought has put some strains on water supplies during the summer. But now the city has to come to terms with a new challenge, excessive rainfall during the summer, compounded by a poorly equipped sewage system that can hardly cope. So, how can Chinese cities better cope with rainstorms and floods? And what are other countries like Australia doing to tackle extreme weather events? 你好, you're listening to People in the Know, bringing you insights into the headline news in China and around the world. I'm Zheng Wang in Beijing. First, we talk to Professor Tony Wong, Chief Executive of the Cooperative Research Centre for Water-Sensitive Cities of the Monash University in Melbourne, Australia. Professor Wong, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
On the 21st of this month, Beijing experienced the worst rainstorm in some 60 decades, and the rainstorm resulted in floods and landslides and even deaths. What was your first reaction when you heard the heavy rainstorm in Beijing?
Well, I think that the reaction that I have was one of sadness with the significant impact that such events have. But at the same time, you reflect on the significant vulnerability of cities to climatic extremes. I think it wasn't that long ago that Beijing, as is the case with many Australian cities, were going through significant droughts. And the drought, in fact, was broken pretty much with a vengeance in terms of significant storm events and flooding conditions. And we experienced that in Australian cities as well. And what it does highlight is the significant vulnerability of our urban environments to those climatic extremes. Heat, for instance, is another climatic extreme that is emerging as one that we need to deal with as well.
So how can we better deal with these climate extreme events? For instance, in the case of floods, how can cities like Beijing digest excess rainfall to let it work for the benefit of the city?
Well, there are things that we can do, and it's a combination of social, technical solution, non-structural as well as structural solutions for a lot of these situations. One is to do with good planning. I think that every city, whether it be Beijing or a new city, undergo a renewal process continually, and that we really need to start to think about how public spaces, public realm are planned in a way that provides a safe passage of flood events. We also need to start to think about how buildings now need to be designed such that they provide additional flood protection in terms of the storing of rain events and the harvesting of stormwater during drought conditions to ensure that the storm that we observed in Beijing and in a whole bunch of other cities, they show the destructive nature of water, but at the same time, they also show the potential of it as a resource to overcome dry conditions, the lack of water, and so on. So as we build new buildings in old cities, as we start to look at how we can integrate the parklands with green and blue corridors for better amenity, better passage of floods, better climate management, we can progressively transform our cities into what we in Australia call water-sensitive cities, cities that are living in much better harmony with the natural environment and a changing climate.
Right. Urban planning is like a key factor to be taken into consideration when designing for a new city, and this is especially true for China, which is entering a rapid process of urbanization. But how about the existing big cities like Beijing? Is it too late to revamp its system?
There's got to be some pain, and there's no question about it. I mean, you cannot retrofit an infrastructure that is degraded or insufficient overnight. But what we can do is to make sure that there is a a long-term vision on how we can transform the cities into a more resilient city. Beijing, as in many other cities in China, are undergoing significant renewal, redevelopment. There are construction going on all the time. Now, if the construction standards and requirements are business as usual based on past practices, then we're simply going to perpetuate the vulnerability and the difficulty that we experience now. But there are new thinking. There are thinking whereby when we plan a city, we can no longer simply plan it for development. We need to plan it for it to have to deliver a whole range of other ecosystem services, whether it be environmental protection, increasing biodiversity, or looking at stormwater as a resource to overcome droughts. And as I said before, urban heat is going to be an emerging issue whereby, again, the way we manage water in our urban environment will start to influence how we mitigate the heat impacts of future heat wave conditions. So it does come to planning, but planning in a way that recognize that there are multiple functions that we expect our urban landscape to deliver. And it's not just a simple case of a nice park somewhere, but they need to be connected for biodiversity, connected for safe passage of floods, connected for delivering microclimate improvement in our cities.
You raised the issue of heat several times in the interview. Do you think that heat is a unique problem to Australia, or is it a challenge facing all major cities like Beijing?
I think that it's something that you will find that many cities will have to deal with. In the northern summer, in your summer, you get report every year of heat wave days that have led to significant vulnerability of the age and the very young to extreme heat conditions, and sometimes they can lead to bushfires or fires and so on. It's the same in the southern hemisphere. Every summer you will read reports of some cities in Australia that will have experienced record heat wave conditions. This is going to be a phenomena whereby the increased densification of cities could exacerbate if we actually don't plan our cities properly. But yet the urbanization of our cities, the intensification of our cities actually provides us with an opportunity to do it differently, and through that embed a lot more design solutions to overcome heat, floods, droughts, and so on.
In what way is water management related to combating heat?
In many ways. There are simple things that we can do in urban design that would help mitigate urban heat, such as keeping water in the landscape, ensuring that there's good access to water to provide greening of our cities. Trees, for instance, are very important in providing not just shade, but a means of evapotranspiration that dissipate the heat wave, the heat that is generated. And therefore that heat is actually not stored in the concrete and in the bitumen of the road, whereby the city find it difficult to cool at night because of the heat that is stored in our urban fabric. So there's a whole bunch of things that we can do that rely on how we manage water in the landscape, that rely on our access to an abundance of water to maintain a green city that then contribute to heat mitigation.
Many Chinese cities have kept expanding, and that process creates the urban sprawl. And in that rainstorm in Beijing, it seems that the suburban areas of Beijing sustained the deadliest hit of this rainfall. Is the drainage system in the urban areas or in the urban sprawl a separate system with the main city district, or should it be connected with the main system?
Well, most urban systems will find a natural pathway to the receiving water, whether it be a local creek or the river and so on. So there's a natural sort of alignment of those drainage systems. But what is really important, and I come back to Beijing as an example, in the recent storm, there was something like to 300 millimeters of rainfall in a 16-hour, 20-hour period. If you think about what the Koreans are trying to do, they are looking at how every new building are now required to have rainwater tanks, and that rainwater tank is fantastic for harvesting stormwater as a resource. But those rainwater tanks, if it is controlled in a way whereby it is coupled with the prediction of imminent high-intense storms, a lot of those tanks, in fact, could be purged in terms of a preemptive release of water from the rainwater tanks. And what essentially it does then is that the tanks are storage for the rainstorm that occur, and therefore reduce the amount of water that runs off the urban catchments during that particular storm event. So it's almost like a preemptive release of water, such that many roof areas in the city suddenly do not contribute to stormwater. Now, that is one way of reducing the stress on a existing drainage infrastructure. But my reading of the papers of the Beijing storm has a lot to do with the fact that the existing infrastructure, poorly maintained, is silted up, and that is something that can be addressed very quickly. Just make sure that those systems are maintained, make sure that you do not actually find construction activities generating a tremendous amount of silt that finds its way into the stormwater system and clogging that up. So, you have an infrastructure. That infrastructure really need to be nurtured along to make sure that its capacity is maintained, rather than to see that infrastructure degrade, because it is right. To retrofit an existing infrastructure, is incredibly expensive.
So the water tank you mentioned in South Korea can be mounted on the existing buildings without changing the plumbing of the old building?
It could do so. I mean, the space available could limit that. But if you have buildings that have underground garages, for instance, to take up a couple of car parking space to provide a tank in there that provides both an opportunity to harvest water during the dry period when you only have a small amount of rainfall, but very important, or an opportunity to store rainstorm during extreme storms, can actually push or delay the contribution of that roof area to the stormwater system, and therefore reduce the flooding that could occur.
That was Professor Tony Wong, Chief Executive of the Cooperative Research Centre for Water-Sensitive Cities of the Monash University in Melbourne, Australia. Professor Wong, thank you very much for being on the program and for insights.
Our discussion continues after a short break.
What's happening in China now?
Change water factory model into a domestic demand-driven economic growth.
Only by finding correct development model can a country achieve Millennium Development Goals.
What's happening around the world?
Going to the moon is only a preliminary step.
About 1/3 of people who've been through a disaster say they believe they got something good out of it.
People in the Know is China's only English current affair interview program. Each weekday, we bring you in-depth discussions featuring events that shape not only China, but the world as well.
Ni hao, you're listening to People in the Know, bring you insights into the headline news in China and around the world. I'm Zheng Guan in Beijing. In this edition of the program, we're taking a look at urban water management from a global perspective. Now, from the domestic scene, we talk to Dr. Jia Haifeng, Associate Professor in the Department of Environmental Science and Engineering of Tsinghua University.
Professor Jia, welcome to the program.
Thanks.
On the 21st of July, Beijing saw the heaviest rainfall for the past several decades, resulting in deaths, flooding, power outages, and even landslides. And many people have pinned their blame on Beijing's drainage system. Do you think so? Could you tell us what exactly went wrong about the drainage system in Beijing?
Yes, it is the very heaviest raining I experienced in Beijing. That is, I also in the airport just be handled for fly to another city. And that is the average rainfall in Beijing urban areas is about 160 millimeter. So 1 day's rainfall is equivalent to the 1/3 of the whole year's annual rainfall in recent years. So it caused a very huge damage and negative impact to the Beijing. But it's not only the problem of drainage system. It exposed many problems in many aspects of the urban development and management. It including how to forewarning and the urban planning. They have unlimited and overexpanded of urban development. The drainage system, their planning, construction, and maintain. Also, the public education should be another problem. So it's have a lot of impact. So it's not only the drainage system. Many problems be exposed by the big storm rainfall.
So the storm has laid bare many problems you just mentioned. But how should big cities like Beijing work to prepare for unexpected extreme weather events like the rainstorms we saw on July 21st? And what can be done to improve the system?
Yes, many cities, just like Beijing, it's an old city, but it's also the new metropolitans. So its drainage system is very complex. Some part of them is good, but some others may be failures and some problem during the rainfalls. So how to do this is, I think, after the big rainfall, not only for Beijing, it's also for other cities, we should do a very thoroughly survey and review of the drainage system and find the key problem and also some weak point in the system, and then drive a very flexible planning to how to prepare the failure part of drainage system, how to update the system to meet the requirements of urban sustainable development, and we also to need more attention to the management and the routine maintenance of the facility in the drainage system, because there are a lot of facilities such as pump station, some storage stand facilities, and also some the water treatment plant, the receive river system. There's a lot of facility. We should to pay more attention to the routine maintenance of the facilities.
Right. In the past decade, Beijing has undergone tremendous regeneration of the city. We saw a lot of skyscrapers being put up, and we saw new railways being opened, especially after the Olympics. But the sewage system is usually an underground system, and it seems that we tend to neglect the importance of this part. Tell us, how important is the sewage management or sewage system to a city's water management or a city's urban infrastructure system?
Yes, not only in Beijing, the city is developed very rapidly. You just mentioned the new building, the new roads, but we must to say the sewage system is an essential part of the urban ecosystem, just like the metropolism of the human. So well planned and well constructed and properly operate sewage system could keep the sound urban water environment and guarantee the sustain of the city ecosystem. So the sewage system usually they consist of many parts, such as the sewage pipe system, the pump station, storage facility, and the wastewater treatment plants and receiving water bodies. So it is the whole integrated system in the city. It's very important for the healthy ecosystem of the city.
This is People in the Know. We're speaking to Dr. Jia Haifeng, Associate Professor of the Department of Environmental Science and Engineering of the Tsinghua University in Beijing. Dr. Jia, are there any cities that can be served as an example of urban water management? And what can cities like Beijing learn from these cities that are renowned for their successful urban planning?
Yes, but different city has its own situation and condition. Some are common for most of the city. We can learn from other cities, but some are unique. So for every city, it couldn't to copy other strategy directly. So it should be developed its own water management strategies, techniques, and some approach according to its own condition and situation. However, it's a city for all over the world. It has some common features, so we can learn something from them, such as the LID BMP in U.S. and Germany. That means that for the low-impact development and the best practice, management practice for the urban runoff control. That is focused on the run in the source control in the whole system. So this is a practice we can learn from that. Also, in the London, Mexico, they have a very huge drainage tunnel underneath. And also in Tokyo, they built very huge storage facility and so on. So different cities, they have different conditions, they have their keys. So we can learn and combine them together and then to develop the strategy according to the local conditions.
It is for sure that the Beijing municipal government will take some measures to revamp the city's drainage system, but we understand that this project can be very costly, both in terms of budget and in terms of the inconvenience posed to both the residents and the businesses by construction and ongoing public works. According to your experience, how can we minimize the negative impact of keeping a city's drainage system up to date?
Yes, you're right. The construction and maintenance of the drainage system is costly and time-consuming. So it's a tough job. I think to minimize the negative impact, we should to consider it not only a drainage system, but we should consider it as an integral part of the urban system. So it should be planned, constructed, and maintained along with the urban development. So we should fully consider the whole system, include how to control the source, how to well planning and maintain the middle process, and how to maintain the receiving upstream, the downstream receiving water bodies. So we should fully utilize the function of each part of the whole system. So in this case, every part can be worked one by one. So this should be the method to minimize. Maybe we pay more attention to one part, but it's useless, maybe.
Back to the first few questions, you mentioned that the rainstorm and the floods in Beijing does not only reveal the flaws with its drainage system, but also other problems. For instance, how can we provide early warning services to the city dwellers and all that? So how has modern technology evolved to help us predict and better manage flash floods? Have we seen any improvements in weather forecasting as well as the ability to predict areas of particular vulnerability?
Yes, modeling is a very important and very essential technique for the weather forecast, also for the modeling of the runoff in the urban areas. There has a lot of advance in the modeling, along with the computer science and also the research in the natural hydro cycles. But it's a very complex problem. It has many uncertainty, a lot of influence factors. Climate change is one of the main factors. It's all over the world we talking about the climate change. But it's hard to say because there's a lot of uncertainty. One of my colleagues told me his house in United States also flooded recently because of very extreme storm. But we still have many things to do to revise the modeling, to make more monitoring point, to get the more details data, to recognize the pattern, to get more information to help the decision maker to do that.
That was Dr. Jia Haifeng, Associate Professor of the Department of Environmental Science and Engineering of the Tsinghua University, talking about urban water management in Beijing. Professor Jia, thank you very much for being on the program and for your insights.
You're welcome.
As the flood recedes, Beijing should get down to work, making the city better equipped to handle rainstorms and floods. And they may not have much time before the next storm comes. Questions or comments for us can be sent to pik@cri.com.cn. For program producers Xu Yang, Chen Mo, Chen Cong, and Autumn Seliga, I'm Chen Guan in Beijing. Join us at the same time tomorrow.
Chinese issues.
China is growing. China needs to slow down the investment growth.
International affairs.
The global imbalance actually was first. The economy will see that's modest, optimistic.
People in the Know is CRI's in-depth current affairs program that provides you with daily insights into the events that shape China and the rest of the world.